It is truly my pleasure to be here, to be able to introduce Sam on behalf of KCI Ketchum Canada. At the heart of everything that we do at KCI, it really is the passion to help build capacity in the not-for-profit sector, whether it's helping build teams or whether to reach charities' not-for-profit revenue generation goals. So we're also always thrilled to be a sponsor of AFP because AFP builds the capacity for each of us as professionals to do our absolute best. And today is certainly an example of a wonderful job in building D3. So now I get to introduce Sam. As you've all read in Sam's bio, he's the CEO of CBT Associates. And we all know Sam's name as being synonymous with the great success at Pathways to Education. When you hear of the growth of this organization that started as a small charity and now is having an impact nationwide, it's something that we all looked and can see Sam's imprint on. And we'll be hearing more about that today. To really understand a little bit more about Sam, I did a little bit of my own digging, and there's a great article in the Globe and Mail that quotes his passion for pathways. I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to read it from my notes. So here's about Sam. What gets me going in the morning is to take a look at a problem and think of a way to solve it, to bring together the assets you need and the supports you need, and then build it in a way that is a sustainable operation. So with that introduction, I'd like to bring to the stage Sam.
So first of all, thank you very much to the AFP for having me. Mark and Maria, fantastic thing that you guys have done. And of course, the other speakers have thanked Joe for inviting them. I had a slightly different experience. I was told by Joe that this was happening on the 13th and that I was to be here at 8. So I was kind of asked, told, somewhere, but that's our relationship. So any event, I'm delighted to be here. And I want to talk to you about social impact, but really what I want to talk to you about is disruption. And we're seeing it throughout, and we're going to talk about it throughout the entire presentation. A good backdrop on it is just to think about how philanthropy and charity has gone. Charity goes way, way back. Certainly you can find discussions about it in the 1500s and 1600s, some of the families of Europe. You can see it in some of the families of Asia. Perhaps it began in North America with Ben Franklin's charity in the 1700s. The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Mellons, families here in Canada as well, building up these great charities, but really charities that were meant to, I'll say, deal with a symptom, not a cause. Hey, let's build a hospital. In the case of Carnegie, let's build hundreds of libraries across the United States. In the case of the Rockefellers, let's build big buildings and arts and other things. But let's deal with the cause here. And that went on for a period of time up until the 30s with a bit of a pause, obviously, with the Depression and then World War II. And then afterwards, what I call the expansion phase of charities, really characterized by a much broader base of donors, massive expansion cause-related charities, and the professionalization of fundraising. All of you are a result of that big change. And you saw things happen. We have 90,000 charities now. In Canada, we raise somewhere between $20 and $25 billion. And the professionalism came in the case of really, really big organizations. And just to name a few, the Canadian Cancer Society in 1938, Heart and Stroke in 1952, and then again, this great institution of which we're in the tower of, Sick Kids Foundation in 72, perhaps what is today the greatest example in the country, or one of the greatest examples of a professional fundraising organization. And that went on for a long period of time, but frankly, with really remarkably little innovation. And when I think about the innovation, I look at companies in the top 30 companies in the Dow Jones and NASDAQ back in the 1980s, and I look at it today. It looks very different. I look at the top 30 companies in the 80s and charitable, not-for-profits, and I look at today, remarkably little movement. Like, remarkably little movement. I'd urge you to think about that. And that really began to spawn then this whole thing that again changed, and I'll call it somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000, where donors started thinking less with the heart and far more with the head. The heart became the entry point, for sure, My cause is important, I personally have AFib, so AFib to me is important. I want to give to heart and stroke. But then it became people wanted to say, well, what about the head? Venture philanthropy through people like New Profit Inc. came into thing. The new title, philanthrocapitalism, came into play. You saw big, massive groups in the U.S., like the Gates Foundations and others, begin to take very directed approach to solving disease or solving hunger. You began to see a lot of your passive donations. How many of you have seen a lot of your donations go from passive to directed? People want to be involved. They want to make a difference. And all of that is because they want to see a return on investment. They don't want to just feel good anymore about what they're giving to. They want to know that what they're giving to has a demonstrable, real return on investment. And then we just saw Aaron talk at length about millennials. Millennials are changing the game completely in the not-for-profit space. Again, there was a study done in the UK recently. 42% of millennials said they give. And when questioned, how do they give? Well, we buy products from for-profit companies that give back to society. I want to have a beer, so I'm not going to buy a Coors, I'm going to buy a Bose, because Bose gives to society, right? The classic is, I want to buy shoes, I'm going to buy from Tom's, because I know they give shoes to Argentina. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I need to buy stuff for my house, so I'm not going to Home Depot, I'm going to go to Restore. Why? Because Restore gives back to Habitat for Humanity. And you're seeing this because in 2015, an interesting thing occurred. We had record donations in Canada. Receipted returns were down enormously, 48,000 down enormously in CRA. So you've got this massive, even though the dollars were going up, this massive compression happening in the world. And that was the example, and all of this created some what I call 3.0 charities. Charities that focus fundamentally on what's the business problem we're trying to solve. Let's go out, let's put the things in place, let's run it like a business. Pathways, we think of it as sales. We don't think of it as fundraising or donation. We think of it as sales. We run it with a franchise model. We think about our partners as our franchisees, now 21 across the coast. We focus furiously on our business model and how we make it work. We don't focus on how do we get donors and donations as much, but how do we make the whole thing integrate? And then the LEAP Center, which is really New Profit Inc. Canada, if you will, flipped that whole model on its head. We said, well, how do charities have to survive? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go out and find great charities with great ideas, and instead of then building all the resources around them, we're going to deliver those resources in a venture model to them. And then you have the Upside Foundation, and there are others like Kiva and others. I won't go into others. But you saw fundamentally different charities evolve and succeed. And, Pathways, because of the model, we've raised over $300 million to date since our inceptions. We're helping about 50,000 kid years right now. So big charities have grown up based on this. You got to show metrics. You got to show returns. These changes in and of themselves are pretty interesting, but I would tell you dwarfed by the private sector and what the private sector is doing. And the introduction truly of social mission of a company rather than a company that helps a cause. On the slide, you see Tom's. You see Feedback. How many know what Feedback does here in Toronto? Okay, so Feedback's this new startup company. What they do is they realize restaurants throw away a lot of food. They're about food sustainability. So they'll offer you a significant discount if you buy the food late in the day, and for every meal you buy at that deep discount so we don't waste food, they donate to a charity. You look at Me to We, the Me to We Corporation, as opposed to the We Charity. How do I fund the charity? I fund the charity by going out and creating a sustainable business model that's repeatable and replicable, and I go out and do that. I don't rely on the good feelings of donors who are perfectly stewarded to do that. Social mission, in fact, has become integral to all of companies' success. The number one reason people donate to Pathways for the big corporations is because it helps attract and retain the young professionals. And they will tell you that. EY, a big donor of ours, Trent Lew before him, very vocal. They do it because it's part of their corporate cause to give back and to help and give mission-related opportunities to it. It is in their very DNA, in their very human resource strategies. And then, of course, there are new channels, social financing and others that are coming up. And I won't go through all of them. And Bell Let's Talk is something near and dear to my heart. You'll hear in a second. But the private sector is becoming mission-driven. So we have this change happening in the last 10 to 15 years of returns matter, output matters, not just the cause anymore in the not-for-profit. Private sector now, frankly, is in your space. And that's caused philanthropy, in my mind, to change forever. Donors now want to invest, we used to call it donate, in social missions, but missions that have a sustainable underlying business model that I know can last for a long time. It's from cause to mission. The distinction, importantly, and one of the missions I want to leave, I believe firmly the distinction between the not-for-profit world as you think about it and the for-profit world will only be maintained at Revenue Canada. It will not be maintained in any of the ways you run your organizations. And I'll go into that in a second. And achieving your mission in efficient and sustainable ways is what really matters. These all are going to have pretty radical organizational changes for you. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you just think of your human capital strategy or your revenue model or your others, the impact are going to be unbelievable. Salary in the for-profit world used to be all that mattered. In the cause world, and we all know this, I can tell you in the charities I've been involved with, I've founded several of them, we could attract people because they were so cause-related. Maybe compensation wasn't first or second on their list. Today, more and more, your competition for human resources, your competition for the most important thing in your business is not what you think it is. A speaker later on, Mike Burns, super successful guy in the for-profit sector, now thoroughly embedded in the not-for-profit sector. Everything is switching over. Everything is merging. Everything is harmonizing. And I can go through your revenue model, donors, look at what Me2We, look at what Restore has done on creating a sustainable model. And I can go through all of those to give you an idea of what that's like. But I think it's clear. The lines are blurred. The merging together, everything is becoming one. And I think it's interesting to illustrate that in my story. So my story is I'm a Harvard MBA in 1988. I'm unfortunately coming up to my 30th year reunion. God, that hurts. 30 years. 13th year reunion would be fine. 30, it's a little bit long in the tooth. But I've been fortunate enough to grow up and had lots of opportunities. And one of the great blessings of my life is I've got to live a bunch of different lives, whether in the for-profit world, the not-for-profit world. I've even been in the government world, both as a visiting economist in Ottawa, but also in chairing the BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada. But I was always brought up in there. I got my business, I got my not-for-profit work. The two do not match. And then October 18th, 2011 happened to me. My version of life happened about 7:35 in the morning in Zurich. My brother dropped dead walking to work. I had had in previous 16 months 2 heart operations. I had had some other life stuff happen. Everyone has these things. This was just my version. I was one of these, gut it out, go forward, beat it out. About 2 weeks later, I woke up, turned to my wife, and I said, all those things I learned when I was on the board of CAMH, all those theoretical things about depression, anxiety, I said, I think they're real. And my wife, in her sensitive way, said, effectively, no shit. We can see that. For those of you who know my wife, know that's probably actually a calmed-down version of what she would have said to me. But that began a journey, and that began a journey for me to try and figure out how to deal with my own mental health depression issue. And the reality is in Canada, here is just a slight chart we use, it's very hard. If you're in the public sector, there's huge wait lists. In fact, 80% of people go to their GPs. GPs have 10 minutes to see you. It's the reason why we are the largest users of antidepressant drugs in the world per capita. Why? Because it's free. People can get it quickly. If you're lucky, you can find a psychologist that works for you, but Fidelity's all over the map. And if you're really lucky, you can get into a psychiatrist, but you got to live in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver or some city where you have concentrations of them. And by the way, you have to stay depressed for 6 to 9 months because that's how long it's going to take you to get in there. Okay? So I began my journey when I sort of came through it in the summer of 12, began to think about how do I solve this problem. And the problem that I wanted to solve was how do I bring effective mental health care affordably and accessible to all Canadians. That's the mission statement. Effective, affordable, accessible. But how do I do it? And there were lots of different ways. I approached CAMH. I talked about working in the charitable world with CAMH. I approached, I talked to the Canadian Mental Health Association. I knew the people, Michael Wilson, who is a friend. I talked to Michael about how to do it and how to get involved. Ultimately, I decided that the not-for-profit solution to this problem, which in the past would have been solved and was trying to be solved not-for-profit, had that business model had limitations. And so in the end of the day, what I ended up doing, and actually Claire formed the company and I joined her to become CEO, is we've started Beacon. We're now the largest clinic operation in Ontario. We'll see 25,000 people this year in our clinics, but also we have a digital platform now that's been proven through our work and through the people on it called Beacon that provides effective, affordable, accessible to all for less than 20% of the cost. You don't have to travel. You do it when, where, how you want it. And it's super effective, I would say, for mild to moderate to moderately severe most mood and anxiety conditions. And importantly, the social cause is to all. All also implies has to be sustainable. To all is we can now take, and we just were awarded Vendor of Record in Ontario, we can now take a government social worker who could see 20 people a week for an hour. They can now look after 125. And soon, with artificial intelligence and machine learning and other things we're building into it, we'll be able to see 200 people a week, where today they can only see 20. A social problem solved, but solved through the model of not-for-profit, or for-profit, rather. So that's my journey, and that's why I think it's so critical that all of you in this room who are doing fantastic and phenomenal work really need to think hard about the sustainability and the long-term viability of your business model. When that wave comes through that Aaron showed us earlier, and 55% of the workforce are millennials, and millennials view their spending as their social giving, as they do to a large extent, that dramatically changes how you think about identifying, cultivating, capturing, and stewarding your donors, and whether or not that even works. So the key themes for success, in my view, is it is just the new norm. Rapid, disruptive innovation. Donation business model, I have my view. I think it's going to be hard to sustain, except for if you're one of the great institutions, not one of the 90,000, one of the great institutions, Sick Kids. Because Sick Kids is not only a gatherer of funds, they also are a doer of things, given that they're so closely aligned with the hospital. Organizations like that, I believe, will thrive. Pathways, a collector of funds, a doer of things. Cause no longer cuts it. If you don't measure your results today, people like myself won't talk. Like, we specifically don't donate to things unless we can see how our money is going. Boldness, creative, and assertiveness is there. And act local, think global, as we've all talked about and I alluded to earlier. How does this actually apply, again, to my real world? And Sue Gillespie's in the audience here somewhere, or at least there's Sue over there. Sue hates this slide. She is, because today we help about 10,000 kids every day. By 2015, we will be helping and touching 100,000 kids. We won't be touching them and helping them the same way. We won't be doing exactly what we do today, but we will in a way that is going to be measurable, quantifiable, and affordable and sustainable. We will be touching 100,000 kids a day. Massive impact, massive disruption, massive work to be done, but also a way to fundamentally change how we think about what we do. Machine learning and AI will absolutely play a part of that. Digital technologies will play a part of that. Partners, which Sue has been fantastic at gaining a whole bunch of new partners, the federal government, provincial governments, and cities, all play a part of that. But Pathways itself, which is, I will say with some modesty, a pretty well-known, pretty successful charity, Pathways itself is going to disrupt. We are going to change our model because we think it's that important to keep going. So finally, a little bit repetitive here, the distinction is gone. I will tell you the war for your people is no longer about, I have to go find somebody in not-for-profit who's a good fundraiser. No, the war is people want cause and comp. People want meaning and the ability to live. That now crosses all barriers. Polenta, which we all copied everybody on, said it, I think it was in 2010 in his TED Talk, his TED Talk was prophetic in the sense that that's what needs to happen going forward. Everything will harmonize. This democratization of support, the aggregators have a problem. If you are simply an aggregator of funds and then you simply say, I'm going to then take those funds out, hey, I can go on Dr. Google or I can go on some of these information sources and I can find out where I want to direct my donations pretty quickly. I don't need to go and say, here's just a blanket check like back in the 80s because I couldn't figure out who was the best doctor. I couldn't figure out who was the best deliverer of this service because I didn't have the information. The information advantage is gone. The information advantage is in your hands. It's in the world's hands. Facebook, others have made sure that's happened. And that's going to result where we've already seen some, breast cancer, Canadian Cancer, United Way, York, Toronto. I think you're also going to see massive consolidation. And you're going to see massive change in our industry. And it's going to be those of us that get out in front of it, realize and recognize it's coming, that I think are going to have the most success. And then finally, because we're in Canada, I thought it was important to end with a Steve Bannon quote. People wanted change. They wanted real change this time. And all we needed to do was focus on that message and just give them permission to change. Every one of those pictures on that thing, if you'd sat here 4 years ago today and honest with yourself, you would not have predicted any of those. The closest would have been Trudeau. But even at the time, 4 years ago, Harper government looked like it was doing a good job in negotiating. You would have looked at all those pictures, and if I'd have said to you, I want you to bet on 3 of them, you would have never, ever in your wildest mind came up with that. Change is real. Change is happening. It's happening here. It's happening to us. It's happening everywhere. Embrace it. Go for it, and you'll do great. Thank you.